Today's shiur begins 3 lines from the bottom of Daf Mem Dalid Omud Beis. The last word on line, Toni Shilo. You notice at that point, at the bottom of Mem Dalid Omud Beis, that Shilo, a name, appears in a firebox. On the side, under the Mivneh heading, you see that this represents a marking of significance, Ha'isuk Betoni Shilo, the preoccupation of the Gemara with the teaching that Shilo will present to us. Mamshich ad Daf Mem Hey Omid Beis. It will take quite a bit of time. It covers a lot of ground as far as the Gemara is concerned, going all the way till Mem Hey Omid Beis. The Gemara, Toni Shilo, Shalosh Midos Benara. There are 3 categories of halacha that are of concern to us regarding the Nara Hamurasa. This is a girl between age 12 and 12 and a half that entered the first stage of marriage, and the issue of her having intimacy with some other man comes to the fore. There are 3 categories. Number 1, Bo'u Lo Edim Beveis Chomiha Shezinsa Beveis Aviha. Beis Chomiha literally means her father-in-law's house, but it means, for our purposes, witnesses came after she consummated her marriage, after Nisuin with her husband, that testify that she had intimacy. Beveis Aviha means in her father's house, but for our purposes it means as an arusa, when she was still in the first stage of marriage. The result, the Gemara continues at the top of Mem Hey Amud Aleph, Seiklin Oisa Al Pesach Beis Aviha. She is punished by the stoning form of execution at the entrance to her father's house. Rashi at the top line says, the Pasuk says, Votziu es hanara al Pesach beis Aviha. The Nara is to be taken to the entrance to the father's house. V'hai bevo edim beis Chomiha ksiv. This Pasuk is in the context of a woman who already had reached the Nisuin level of marriage, consummated a marriage. This particular pasuk is found in the section of Dvarim Perek Chof Beis that deals with Motzi Shemra. You'll see that that's found in Psukim, between Psukim Yud Gimel and Chof Aleph. Over there, deals with the topic of Motzi Shemra. And the Meforish Beikra ve'ekra ve'lea alma kishnisis. Since the words ve'ekra ve'lea appear, which means where the husband says, and I had intimacy with her, that indicates that she had consummated her marriage, so that the case of a nara murasa, of having had znus, and the information coming to the fore after she had reached Nisuin is what we are referring to here. It's what the Pasuk is referring to. Once again, the Pasuk that said, what Rashi quoted, V'hotziu es hanara al Pesach beis Aviha. The second category, Bo'u lo edim beveis Aviha, shezinsa beveis Aviha. Witnesses come and tell us that a girl who had entered the first stage of marriage, she's an arusa, but had not consummated the marriage yet, before Nisuin. And they tell us that as an arusa, she had forbidden intimacy with a man other than the oros, other than her husband. Soiklin oisa al Pesach Sharair. She is punished, she's executed through stoning at the gate of the city. This pasuk is also found in Dvarim Perek Chof Beis, but it's in a different section. It's a section that deals with the Nar or Hamurasa that willingly had practiced znus. And number 3, Sorcha Ulebesof Bogra. Here's a case of her. Sorcha literally means to go astray. But we're talking about a Nara that was Murasa, and she had forbidden intimacy, and she then progressed age-wise into the Bagrus level. That means she crossed the 12-and-a-half-year-old mark. There's what we call an ishtini gufa took place here. She had committed the sin while a nara, and then she aged. She became 12-and-a-half. There was a physical change in that sense in terms of she aged physically. And this took place between the sin and the actual hamoda bedin, the actual court case, appearance in court, tidon bechenek. The result here is that she is to be executed through the chenek method of execution, not stoning but strangulation. Let's take a look at Rashi on the side, across from here, more or less, a line or two up. You see tidon bechenek kihechi di'ilu zanoi hashta. Has she done znus now as a bogeres, having left the realm of na'arus, and she's crossed the line above 12-and-a-half. If she had, let's say she now, as a married woman, committed an act of harlotry. Lav skila ika ela chenek. The punishment at this point is the chenek punishment. So had she committed the sin now, she didn't commit the sin now, she committed it while she was still a nara. But had she committed it now, she would be punishable by chenek. Let's skip the bracketed section in Rashi. Hashta nami b'chenek. Now too, that true she didn't commit the sin now, but the court case is taking place now as a bogeres. So ashtanami b'chenek. The kevon the ishteni gufa bein chet lamoda behin. Since there was a bodily change between the commission of the sin and the court appearance, ishteni katla lichidahashta. The type of death penalty also changes to what it would be if she had done the sin right now. Now, in the bracketed section of Rashi that we skip, we'll go back over that now. The Rashi pointed out that she's going to be judged b'chenek, just meaning that if she had done the znus now, she wouldn't get skila. Ela chenek dechi ksiv skila bezinsa nara ksiv. Where the execution of skila is stated for a girl who does the znus, the sin, the forbidden intimacy, as a nara, shenema kia nara besula et v'chulei. So too, we're saying that even though in our case the sin was committed while she was a nara, but the hamoda bedin, the court appearance, takes place after the bagrus sets and after the shinui haguf. So as a result of the shinui haguf, there's a shinui katla. There's a shinui in the method of execution. Now we go back to the Gemara. L'meimra. This is in a sense the beginning of a question, a long question. L'meimra, you seem to be suggesting then the cholhecha the ishtani gufa, wherever there's a body change that takes place before the hamoda bedin, ishtani katla. That also results in a change in the method of execution. In other words, we don't focus strictly on what the method of execution would have been at the point the sin was committed. We take this into consideration as well, that had she committed the sin now, after a shinui haguf, the method of execution would have changed. So too, even though the sin took place when she was still a na'ara, which would have resulted in skila, but the hamoda bedin, the court case, is taking place after the shinui haguf. So the rule that comes out of this would seem to be that wherever there's a shinui aguf, there is going to be a shinui katla, a shinui in the method of execution. And with that in mind, v'ramini, we now raise what seems to be a contradiction. On the side of the Gemara, under our nosei heading, we've written birur. We're going to try to clarify. I amrinon dehecha de ishtani gufa ishtani dina olo. That where we are dealing with a change in the goof, in the body, does that change the din as well? So we continue with a source that will seem to indicate otherwise. Naro hamurasa shezinsa. We're reading in the Gemara. The source says that a naro that entered the first stage of marriage, that had an illicit intimacy, umishabogra hotzi alel shem ra, and after she crossed the line of bagrus, she became a bogeres. That's 12 and a half. The husband announced, promulgated, that she had sinned. Shem ra is a bad name. Who eino loike the eino noisein me'asela. If he turns out to be lying, so we'll say the form of punishment that the Torah speaks about in this topic of motzi shem ra in Devarim Perek Chof Beis. If it turns out that he is lying, so he will not receive the lashings that the Torah alludes to, and he will not pay the 100 pieces of silver that the Torah alludes to. There's a bracketed section that we skip initially. The text is not accurate within the brackets. Ohi ozomameha makdimin lebeis haskila. If she, in fact, is guilty, if she had committed the act of harlotry, or the witnesses that testified to that effect that she is guilty, but turned out to be fraudulent, they were zoimimim, they couldn't have testified because at the time they said that event had taken place, they were somewhere else with other people. So they get what they tried to do, so they would get stoned as they tried to stone her. And that's what the closing phrase of the source says when it says, "Oh he, ozo memeha, magdimin lebeis haskila." Notice the dashed underlining. That's the key thing for us to focus on right now. We're dealing with a girl that is now a bogeres. And we said before that the execution of skila is reserved for a nara. Here we're dealing with a girl that, though when she committed the act of harlotry she was a nara, but right now she's a bogeres. What penalty, what execution is she going to receive? The old form, the skila. So that even though it appears that we have an ishtani gufa situation, nevertheless, lo ishtani katla, the form of execution doesn't change from what it would have been at the time of the sin. Now, just to complete the reading properly, we go over the bracketed section. Within the brackets it says, "He v'zomemel makdimin lebeis haskila." The offending woman and the fraudulent witnesses are sent to be stoned. Now that can't be. He v'zomemel, it's not good that both she and the fraudulent witnesses. In other words, if she's being sent to being stoned, then the witnesses were not fraudulent. And if the witnesses were fraudulent, then she isn't going to get stoned. Ela ohi ozomemeha makdimin lebeis haskila. As we explained before, it's either she, meaning the witnesses were not shown to be fraudulent, or if they were, then they will be sent to the beis haskila, the site at which the stoning takes place. We glance now at Rashi. Rashi that we're looking at is toward the end of the narrow lines. L'beis haskila. Almo, you see from here, Afal Gab de Ishtani Gufa, even though the body change has taken place, she's now a Bogeres, Viluzanoi Hashta Bas Cheneki. Had she committed the adultery, she would now be, at this point, she would be sentenced to strangulation. Lo Amrino Nishtani Katla. We don't say that the form of execution changes just because of the Shinui Haguf. So this is we'll say a challenge to what the Toni Shilo source in section 3 seemed to indicate. We have a house marking that appears, and on the side under the Mivneh heading, you'll see that Rava and later Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak appear in this. Nire Loimar, it seems that we will say, L'Rava ha-de-Toni Shilo eino shoni b'machlokas. According to Rava's approach, the teaching of Shiloh is not something that is part of is not controversial. And he'll give his explanation. You'll see that there's no machlokes. And according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, he says, "Toni Shiloh ave machlokes tanoim." That what Shiloh is teaching is really a machlokes tanoim. So that if you see a Tanaic source that indicates otherwise, realize that it represents another school of thought, but not that we have a contradiction on hand. Just this machlokes, a situation of differing opinions. Now the Gemara. Omar Rava, Motzi Shemra Ko Amris. Are you trying to challenge the Toni Shilo based on the case of Motzi Shemra, the parsha in the Torah that describes a husband that after marrying his wife, he announces that she behaved in a harlotrous fashion. That's a parsha, special parsha in the Torah, as we mentioned in Perek Chof Beis in Sefer Dvorim. That parsha of Motzi Shemra, shiny Motzi Shemra, the parsha, the halachas of Motzi Shemra, that section in the Torah is different. The chidush hu, it is an unusual. It's an unusual section of law. It doesn't conform to standard halacha. And how is that? Deha nichnesa lechupa v'lo nivala be'alma v'zinsa b'chenek. In general, a girl, regardless of her age, once she consummates her marriage, that's nichnesa lechupa, literally she goes into the marriage canopy, and even if she doesn't have intimacy with her husband at that point, but she was nichnesa lechupa, she went under the marriage canopy, that's called nisuin in general, and then commits an act of adultery, vizinsa, she has intimacy with someone else. Bechenek, she would be punished through chenek. V'ilu motzi shemra beskila. And in contrast, you have the case where the husband says about his wife that she had already been nichnasa lechupa, and then he says that she had behaved illicitly, had a forbidden intimacy. Beskila, she's punished with skila, even though you're dealing with a woman that was nichnasa lechupa. So you can have a case of a standard nichnasa lechupa v'lo nivala, and commits znus, gets chenek. You have the case of motzi shemra, and she's getting skila. Let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi, of several lines under the Gemara text, about the 6th line under the Gemara text, nichnasa lechupa v'lo nivala be'alma v'zinsa b'chenek klomar v'teida d'ha below bogra nami. You should know that without bogra, without the shinui aguf, beloy hoitzah shemra Afilu benarus ishtani dinahu. There would be a change in halacha, a change in execution. Dilu zanoi hashta. If you have a woman that was nichnasa lechuppah and then committed an act of znus, cheneku deika, she would be punished by strangulation. Even since she completed the marriage process by entering the marriage canopy, even though she didn't have intimacy with her husband, Kidisanya lekamon nara v'lo bogeres, besula v'lo beula, meurasa v'lo nesua. My lo nesua. What does lo nesua mean? Inema nesua mamish hainu v'lo beula. Elav nichnasa lechuppah v'lo nivala. Mir Rashi is simply quoting the Gemara later on, but it's things we've seen already. Alma ilu zanoi hashta bas cheneki. Had she done the act of znus now, she would be chayeves in chenek. Vilu motzi shemra oleo hashta v'zanoi koidem knisa l'chuppah b'skila. Whereas in the case of motzi shemra, where he says that she was that she behaved illicitly, and he says that now, and again he articulates that now, and she had done the znus before the knisa l'chuppah, beskila, she would be stoned. Alma b'hitzah shemra, when it comes to that topic, lo amrinon, we don't say the mishum the ishtani dina ilu zanoi hashta lishtani katla habo al yedei znus meikara. We don't say that because of the change in halacha based on had she done the act now, there will be a change in the form of execution that comes as a result of an earlier act of znus. V'hilkach, and therefore ki bogra nami v'nises, we have a case of her reaching bagrus and then consummating her marriage. Lo amrinon b'motzi shemra, we don't say with regard to motzi shemra the mishum dishtani dina the hashta ishtani katla demeikara, because of the changed halacha of right now, meaning had she done the act right now, therefore there will be a change in the form of execution. So all of this is true with regard to motzi shemra. It's treated differently. I just noticed in the Tosfos a further clarification of the chidush element of the motzi shemra parsha. Let us read together in the Tosfos. We're looking in Tosfos. We have a double star, and at the beginning of the line, several lines under the Gemara text, Rabbeinu Shmuel Mefarish. Now, reading in the Tosfos, the Rabbeinu Shmuel explains Shiny Motzi Shemra. The Chidushu, Motzi Shemra has an element of novelty to it. Sharei Nichnasa lechuppah v'lo nivala be'alma b'loy hoitzah Shemra. If you have a girl, a woman that went under the marriage canopy and didn't have intimacy with her husband, and there's no hoitzah Shemra, the husband isn't proclaiming anything about her, v'zinsa achar chuppah, and she committed adultery after the chuppah, and the witnesses testify to that effect, b'chenek, she would get the penalty of strangulation, the punishment of strangulation. The ilu motzi shemra ki hai gavna shezinsa achar nisuin. Have you just replayed the same scenario of the woman having entered the marriage canopy and the husband then speaking up that after the marriage canopy she had znus? Beskila, she would be liable to stoning. Dahachi mashmish tamoy kroi. That's what the psukim indicate. Techtivim emes hoya. This is from the parsha of Motzi Shemra. If what the husband is saying is true, and she turns out to be lacking the basulim, meaning she had intimacy, she is then stoned. Mashma de bechol inyan shalonim sula basulim havi beskila vafilu zinso tachtov. All under all circumstances that the basulim are not found, even when she had znus tachtov after the marriage canopy. And we skip a couple lines in the Tesis. We have a bracketed section, and we continue reading V'hainu chidush, and this is the chidush. That without the husband making claims about his wife's infidelity, at this point, if she does znus after the chuppah, there would be the penalty of chenek. Uvamotzi shemra beskila. But with the husband speaking up, given those very same circumstances, there is stoning. So you see that the case of motzi shemra is different. We go back to the Gemara. Omar lei Rav Huna Braid Rav Yeshua the Rava. Dilma ki chodis rachmona. Maybe when we speak about the Torah and its chidush by motzi shemra, hecha delo ishteni gufa. That's all fine and good when there was no shinui haguf. There was no change in her age or in her body. Aval hecha de ishteni gufa lo chodis rachmona. But where there was a shinu haguf, in other words, where she became a bogeres, then there's no chiddush, even in the case of motzi shemra. And if that be the case, so then in the source that was cited above of Nara Hamurosh Zinso Mishabogra, it should read in that source chenek. Let us look at the Rashi together. V'dilma ki chodis klomar HaRaya de maisinon mistam motzi shemra lekan. That which you're trying to bring as a proof from the standard motzi shemra to our discussion here, lav raya hi lekan. It is, we'll say it's of no relevance to our discussion here. The hasam hu there the afal gavdish dani dina dilu zanoi hashta. In that case, we have this concept of, even though there's a change in din, namely, had she done the znus now, lo ishtani katla, the ha de zanoi meikara, there is not going to be a change in the form of execution for the woman that had done the znus at the outset, prior to this, mishum de lo ishtani gufa, because she didn't undergo any physical change. Who? The chidush shechit shetorah below ishtani gufa chodis, beishtani gufa lo chodis. Avol bogra ishtani gufa hi. In the case of what we had in the Toni Shiloh, where it was, or I should say, in the source that featured bogra in the Naram Rasa Shazinsa source, avol bogra ishtani gufa hi. The ibu bol la edim bebeis avia, and had witnesses come when she was still an arusa, isloch lemeimar, we would have said sorcha ulebasof bogra bechenek. B'motzi shemra nami misha bogra have lei lemisni chenek. Therefore, in the motzi shemra case, when you combine that with bogra, it should have said chenek. So that when you are looking at the when you're looking at the two sources above, the Toni Shiloh source that spoke about sorchel b'sof bogra tidon bechenek, and then the motzi shemra source where there's bogra also, we should have said chenek. Let's turn back to the Gemara now. Elo Omar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok. Ishtani velo ishtani tanoihi. The issue of does the shinui haguf play a role in changing the type of misa, that itself is a machlokes tanoim. If we look in the Rashi, Elo Omar Rav Nachman Yitzchok Haditani Shilo Tidon Bechenek Hoyel Ve'ishtani Gufa Ishtani Katla V'Tanyo Achrita Beskila V'Afagav De Ishtani Gufa Lo Ishtani Katla Tanoihi. So that the sources, according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok, it's true. Now he heard Rava say that Motzi Shemra was a chiddush, but Rav Huna, what Rav Huna Bar Yeshua is saying is that who says that the chiddush goes so far to include even a case where there was a shinui haguf in the case of Motzi Shemra Mishabogra? It could very well be that the chiddush is limited to the case where you did not have a shinui haguf, but once there's a shinui haguf, just like in the first source we said Tidon Bechenek, shouldn't we say the same thing by the Motzi Shemra? And yet the source doesn't say that. It doesn't say Tidon Bechenek, it says Tidon Beskila. This leads Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok to therefore say that the Ishtani Gufa as being a reason for Shinui Hadin is itself a machlokes tanoim. Disnan. And we now bring a source. It's quoted rather briefly over here in this Gemara, but it's an entire sugya in Maseches Horius, and actually also elsewhere, I believe as well. This deals with people who committed a sin that warrants the bringing of a korban chatas. For example, one ate blood, or one ate chelev. Ate it b'shogeg, he brings a korban chatas. There are people that, once they're appointed to special offices, to officialdom, as is the case of someone who is appointed to be a Kohen Gadol, or he's appointed to be a melech, what we call a nosi. If they were to do the same sin, the type of sacrifice they would bring is different than the type of sacrifice for the same sin that would be brought by a commoner. A commoner brings a female, a kifsor seira, a she-goat, or a female sheep as the korban chatos. A Kohen Gadol, if he were to commit that sin, he would bring a par, and a melech would bring a he-goat, a soyer. That's by way of background. Now, we turn to the Gemara. Disnan. Chotu ad shelo nismanu. A sin was committed that warrants the bringing of a korban chatos before they were appointed to the higher position of either Nosi or Kohen Gadol, v'nismanu, and then they were appointed. Harehen kedyotos, even though they underwent a change. So ishtani, it's a type of ishtani gufa, there's a change in their position, they still bring the original type sacrifice. So this opinion represents that opinion that we saw, for example, in the Tani Shilo, that I should say in the correction, that we saw in the source dealing with the Namrasa and Mishabogra, and eventually she gets Skila. That even though there was a change, the original punishment or the original type obligation is what we administer. Rabbi Shimon Omer, if they discovered their sin before they were appointed, so then they bring their original type sacrifice. Because the commission of the sin, the discovery of the sin, all took place before they were appointed. Mishin Ismanu Pturin. But once they were appointed to a higher position and then discovered the sin, they're exempt. Well, what this appears to be saying is that since there's a shinui guf, since there's a change, which would results in the change vis-a-vis the korbanos, and that is what the Tani Shiloh would seem to have said. So, with this in mind, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok's approach to the sources above is that the Tani Shiloh says Ishtani Gufa Ishtani Katla. That is what Reb Shimon seems to represent. The second source that we saw quoted above, that was introduced with the Varamini, would seem to say that Ishtani Gufa Lo Ishtani Katla. Machlokes Tanoim. The Gemara challenges this, though, and we continue now at the top of Omid Beis. We overlooked one point here as far as markings are concerned. We started at triangles right before Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok. These triangles are a ma'akav, an attempt to keep track of the give and take. So we have Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok saying what he did, that it's a machlokes tanoim, and now we have a rejection of that. And these triangles will continue back and forth, as you can see, over the next few lines. The Gemara says, Amor de Shaminon Leila Rabbi Shimon the Ozil Af Boser Yedia. The exemption of Rabbi Shimon is not based on the idea of since there was a shinui haguf, there's a shinui in the din. Not at all. Rabbi Shimon has a certain, let's say, a certain opinion, a certain approach to the issue of korbanos when people change office or rise in office. In order for someone to be chayav a korban, Reb Shimon says it's not enough to have simply committed the sin, but it's also important of when the discovery of the sin took place. So once again, the ptur of Reb Shimon, the exemption of Reb Shimon, is not simply because of the shini haguf, but rather it's because he requires the sin and the discovery thereof to be in the same individual, in the same guf. In the case where the sin took place when they were still commoners, and the discovery of the sin took place after they changed to higher office, so you're lacking this togetherness of sin commission plus discovery. So, and that's what the Gemara is saying here at the top line. In order for someone to be chayav a korban, it's important not just when the sin was committed, but also when this discovery of the sin took place. As far as Reb Shimon is concerned, to say that he looks just at when the discovery took place, and in this case, discovery took place after they were appointed to higher office, and therefore there's a change, and that's the reason that there's a change, and he doesn't look at when the sin actually took place. Is that something that Reb Shimon? That's how Reb Shimon comes to conclusions. Im Kain, if that's how Reb Shimon came to conclusions, then why did he say exempt? Laisi korban ki dahashta. If all Reb Shimon was looking at in order to determine a person's obligation of when the sin, his discovery, the knowledge of when the sin took place, so then he should bring the korban as he is right now. Moshuach par, the Kohen Gadol, Moshuach, the anointed ones, the Kohen Gadol brings a par. V'nosi soyer, and a king brings a soyer, a he-goat. And that should be what he said, instead of saying they are exempt. So the fact that he said they are exempt, that's because the commission of the sin and the discovery thereof did not take place within the same status of that offender. the commission of this took place when he was a commoner, and the discovery took place when he reached when his position changed. But once again, to repeat, Reb Shimon does not reflect what Tony Shiloh said. So it would come out at this point then that we don't see anyone that says that because of Shinui Haguf, there's a Shinui in the din. And needless to say, that would leave then that would be against Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, as we said, wanted to attach the Tony Shiloh approach to the approach taken by one of these Tanoim, namely Rebbe Shimon. But now we're pointing out that Rebbe Shimon's ruling of Pturim is not a function of the Shinui Haguf, and therefore a Shinui in the Din. We continue in the Gemara. Ha'omar lei Rabbi Yochanan Latana Tani Tidon Beskila. In fact, Rabbi Yochanan said to the one who was presenting the Toni Shiloh that, you know what, you should change the end of the source, namely the case of Sorcho Levasof Bogra, to read Tidon Beskila, namely that just because there was a Shinui Haguf, there is no Shinui in the Din. And she gets what she would have received based on when the sin was committed. So if you follow Rabbi Yochanan's approach and then change the text of the original Tani Shiloh, just because there was a change, it doesn't change the katla, the punishment, and that would be like the first opinion in this source with the korbanos, that even though they committed the sin when they were commoners and then were subsequently appointed to high office, they still bring the original type sacrifice. The Gemara asks, though, Ve'amai, how can you say in the Toni Shiloh case of her getting skila? Nara murasam rachmana v'ha bogeres he. The Torah speaks about skila for nara hamurasa. This, in the Toni Shiloh case, she was already a bogeres. So you're giving skila to someone other than that which the Torah envisioned. The Torah said you give the skila to a nara, not to a bogeres. Omar Avila, Omar Kra, Ha-Na'ara. The Torah uses the word Ha-Na'ara, which means Ha-Na'ara Shoyse Kvar. She, when she committed the sin, she was a nara. But now, she's a bogeres. So giving the skila to someone who right now is a bogeres is not a violation of what the Torah said. Omar lei Rav Hananya le Rabbi Eloi. Ihachi. Well, if you're saying that all that really matters is when the sin took place, as far as when the Hotzoas Shemra is after it was Nichnas al Chuppah, or after she's Bagra, that doesn't change anything, then Milkanami Lilki. Then if the husband turns out to be a liar, he should get Malkis, Umeasela Nami Lishlam, and he should have to pay the Measela. And yet in the source that was quoted on Omed Aleph, we saw that if Mishabogra he was Motzil Shemra, there's no Malkis and there's no Measela. But according to what we're saying now, namely Ha-Na'ara, that all we really are focusing on is what she was at the time she committed the offense, and if she was a Nara at the time, if it turns out that the husband is lying, then he should suffer these punishments, and yet the source stated an exemption. So with this, the Gemara Rav Hananya is challenging Rav Elah's answer. Omar Le, Rav Ila says, Rachmona nitzlan mehai daita. Let the Almighty save us from your thinking. Now he doesn't explain himself. He says that what you're saying is just wrong, and we should be spared from such suggestions. Rav Hananya says back to the contrary, let the Almighty spare us from your way of thinking. Well, the time of my, so trying to get into Rav Ila's mindset, well, what is the real reason? Why is it that if the Torah says Hana'ara, and even though she's a Bogeres now, she'll get skila because of the Hana'ara word, why then, if the husband turns out to be lying, does he not get punished, as would have been the case had she not become a Bogeres? There, of course, the Torah says if he's lying, he gets lashed and he has to pay the money. So why is it then that he is exempt? Whereas, just to repeat the problem, we're saying, according to Rav Ila, the fact that she's bogra, that doesn't change the punishment for her when it turns out that she's in fact guilty. But as far as when it turns out that the husband was lying, the halacha does change. Why this split? Omar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ovin Vitemo Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba. Zu ma'aseh gormu lo, v'zeh akimas sfosov gormu lo. Look at each one. Look at the wife and look at the husband. What is the source of the wife's problem, if you will? What is the source of her punishment? It's her act of adultery. Well, that took place when she was a nara. What is the source of the husband's potential punishment? The false speech, if he falsely charges her. Akimas falsas means literally the tilting of his lips. It means his speech, his announcement, his proclamation concerning her infidelity. But if he turns out to be a liar, so he has to pay. Well, the Gemara explains. Zu, the woman who if she was adulterous, Masel Gormula, Kishizanoi Narazanoi, when she committed the illicit intimacy, she was in fact a Nara. Vizeh, regarding the lashing and the paying of 100 pieces of silver by Motzi Shemra, Akima Svasav Gormula, his false speech causes the punishment. Emas Komachayev. At what point does that take place? Hahi Shaita, when he spoke. Vahi Shaita Bogeres Havoy, but when he spoke, she was already a Bogeres. And the parsha of Motzi Shemra was not stated concerning a Bogeres. The Torah speaks about a Na'ara. As you can see, we have a slash mark indicating that which follows is a new trend of thought. On the side of the Gemara, under the nosei, the topic heading, we've written Makoros Lamokum Misa, sources that deal with the site, the place, the location of execution shall Nara Murasa Shezinsa Oved Avodah Zarah, for the adulterous Nara Hamurasa, and for someone who committed idolatry. Don't confuse adultery with idolatry, but in this case they're actually quite similar. The Gemara Tana Rabbana Nara Murasa Shezinsa Seiklin Oisa al Pesach Beis Aviha. She is to be stoned at the entrance to her father's house. Ein lo Pesach Beis So'av. If she doesn't have such an arrangement, Seiklin Oisa al Pesach Sha'ir Hahi. She is to be stoned at the entrance of that particular city. Ubeir Sharuba Oivdei Kechavim, and in a city the majority of whose population are Gentiles, Seiklin Oisa al Pesach Beis Din. She would be stoned at the entrance to the court, not at the city entrance. Kayotzei Badover Atomer. Similarly, we say Ha'ovid Avodas Kechavim Soiklin Oisoi Al Shar She'ovad Bo. He would be stoned. That's the penalty for idolatry at the gate, the entrance of the place that he had violated the command, namely where he had sinned, even if he happens to be judged in a different city. Ubeir Sheruba Oivdei Kechavim Soklin Oisoi Al Pesach Basin, and in a city that is the majority of whom are idol worshippers or are Gentiles, so then he's stoned at the entrance to the court. Just a technical point that I overlooked, is when we read about the Ovid Avodas Kechavim, the preferable place is Soklin Oisel Al Shar. We should add Shar Ha'ir She'ovad Bo, and that girsa you can see in the Rashi. It means at the entrance of the city in which he had practiced the idolatry. Now, if that city happens to be populated mostly by Gentiles, so we don't want him to be stoned at the entrance of that city, rather at the entrance of the court. The Gemara continues, Mino Hani Mili, the Tanu Rabbanan. What are the sources for that which we have taught? Sha'arecha, Zeh Shar She'ovad Bo. Rashi quotes the relevant psukim. The pasuk says, Ki motzei b'kirbecha be'echad sharecha, in the context of idolatry. So the word sharecha appears, and it's a reference to the gate that he had worshipped. Atoy mishar she'ovad bo eino elo shar shenidon bo. When the pasuk says that, again, a slight inaccuracy. The pasuk says sharecha. It says ishahu el sharecha, that the person is taken to the gate and to be punished, to be executed. Where is that gate? Is that the gate that he worshipped, or is it the gate of or maybe it's the gate of the city in which he's judged? So the Gemara answers, Nemar sharecha lamata. It says, V'hotzeiso ishahu el sharecha. That's sharecha lamata. That's where the execution takes place. V'nemar sharecha lamala. There's a pasuk that says, Ki motzei b'kir b'cha b'achad sharecha. Ma sharecha omur lamala shar she'ovad bo. Just like over there, it's clear that it's a reference to the gate that he had sinned in. Af sharecha omur lamata. So too, the gate where the punishment is to take place, Shar She'ovad Bo. It's that gate, it's the gate of that city in which he had committed the sin. Dover Acher, another use of the word, Sharecha v'lo Sharei Oivdei Kechavim. Sharecha means your gates, gates of Jewish cities, not gates of cities that are inhabited by Gentiles. The Gemara asks, but hi sharecha ha'afikte, but we already used the word sharecha to help us define the site of execution. The Gemara says, Im kain, if that's all the pasuk was for, lema kro shar. If all you need is to determine the site of execution, so it would have been enough for the word shar to appear, and we could have made the word comparison using that word. My sharecha, why is the word expanded to say sharecha? Shma mino tarti. From here we learn both points: the site of execution and also the exclusion of a city whose inhabitants are Gentiles. Ashkechon avodas kechavim. So far we've cited sources for idolatry, where the site of execution is to take place. Nam rasa minolan. From where do we know that which we taught regarding the Nara Marasa, that she regarding the site of execution in her case? And we pointed out that the site of execution in her place is the It's the place where she had, and certainly if she doesn't have a Pesach Beis Aviyah, so it's in the city where she had committed the adultery, the gate of that city. So how do I know that? How do I come to the conclusions regarding Namarasa? Omer Rabbi Avo, Gomar, and here we have a string of words that connect various psukim one to the other, which ends up enabling us to compare Nara Hamurasa to Avodah Zarah. And just like by Avodah Zarah we said that the punishment is to take place where she had committed the sin, so too in the case of the Nara Hamurasa, the gate of the city where she had committed the sin. Omar Rabbi Avo, Gomar Pesach mi Pesach, u Pesach mi Shar, v'Shar mi Sha'arecha. So that, as we said, Rashi points out that this is an asmachta. It's not an actual doraisa form of revelation, but it's a rabbinic revelation based on, we'll say, words in the psukim. All that having been said, the word Pesach you find in the case of Namurasa, and the word Sharecha you found by Avodah Zarah, and through this, we'll call it the hop, skip, and jump of comparing words one to another, we are able to conclude that the way we treat the Namurasa, seemingly in the absence of a Pesach Beis Aviyah, that she would be stoned at the gate of the city in which she had gone astray, just like that is what we do with regard to the individual who practiced idolatry. Tonu Rabbanan. And actually we should glance at the side under the Nosei, the topic heading. We see a Machlokes Tanoim, a Tanaic controversy. Mosai Amrinon, when do we say Motzi Shemra Loikil Mishalem? That the husband who was guilty of casting aspersions upon his wife, that she had behaved, she had misbehaved, she had an adulterous relationship, that he is punished through lashing and paying money. When do those punishments apply? According to the Rabbanan, you will see that even if the husband did not actually have intimacy with his wife, according to Rav Lozer ben Yankov, the parsha of Motzi Shemra applies only if the husband had intimacy with his wife, and after having that intimacy, then says that she had misbehaved. The Gemara. Tonu Rabbana Hamotzi Shemra Loike V'Noisein Mea Sela. One who speaks ill, who casts aspersions regarding the fidelity or the infidelity of his wife, is punished by lashing and by paying 100 sela. Sela is a type of currency. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Lilka Isloike Mikol Makom. As far as getting lashed, that will take place under all circumstances. That is a little vague right now. It'll become clear as we go on. Mea Sela, the payment of the money, that is already dependent. Boal Noisein, if he had intimacy with his new wife and then said what he did about her, and he's lying, he'll pay. Lo Baal, if he didn't have intimacy with her, Eino Nosein. So that the Loike Mikol Makom that Rabbi Yehuda said, that's regardless of whether he was Baal or not. He spoke ill of her. Now, the Gemara points out that this machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, komifligi beplukta de Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Rabbanan, they parallel another Tanaic controversy that's found on Daf Mem Vav Amud Aleph, and we have arrows here to the right hand side of the Gemara, and a parallel arrow on Mem Vav Amud Aleph, the lower part of the page. So the last third of the page, you can see an arrow, at which point the Gemara on that line says, again we're looking at Mem Vav Amud Aleph, my Rabbanan, my Rav Lozer ben Yankov. we made references to them. Well, what is the source in which they appear? So, in that source, you can see, using the markings, toward the end of that Tanaic source, you can see a dashed underlining where the Tanakama says, Bain Boal, Bain Lo Boal, that the lashing and the payment of the money, if it turns out the husband is lying, applies whether he had intimacy with her or not. Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov says that the parsha of Motzi Shemra applies only if Boal, only if he had intimacy. There's more detail to that we'll appreciate as we go on in our Gemara. But just to see at least the source in which these two opinions appear, I think that is of value even at this early stage. Now we go back to our Gemara. Our Gemara says that the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda are arguing, even though when you look at the source itself, it's hard to pinpoint at where is the point of controversy, but as the Gemara itself says, their point of controversy parallels the point of controversy between Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov and the Rabbanan there on Mem Vav Aleph, the Hachi Komar. And here we have a diamond, and on the side we explain, these are Shtei Lishonos, two versions, Behezber Machlokas HaTanoim. You'll see that this first version says that the Machlokis that we just saw between the Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda it parallels the machlokes of Rav Ozer ben Yaakov and the Rabbanan. If you notice a few lines down from here, there's an Iko Diamri that's squiggled underline, and the Iko Diamri says that the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda Kulok Rav Ozer ben Yaakov, they both are within. They're arguing within the opinion of Rav Ozer ben Yaakov. And so that will go, as we go on, we'll say more about it. Let's now turn to the Gemara text. So, V'hachi ko'amar, Hamotzi Shemra, Loike, V'noisin me'asela, Bein Boal, Bein Shelo Boal, Kirabonan. The Tanakama, who said that a husband who turns out to be lying about his wife, about claiming that she had been with another man after they had entered marriage, so he gets lashed and he pays money, regardless of whether he, the husband, had intimacy with his new wife or did not. Now we dashed underline Bein Shelo Boal. That will be significant in a moment. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Lukois Loike Mikol Makoim. Rabbi Yehuda says that the Malkus, that is given under all circumstances. As we said with the Rabbanan, whether Boal or not Boal. Me'asela, however, regarding the Me'asela, here you're going to see a difference. Boal noisein, lo Boal eino nosein. That is Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov. Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov claims that the parsha of Motzi Shemra was stated only if the husband had relations with his new wife. Now, as far as the Malkus is concerned, that Rabbi Yehuda says he gets Malkus whether Boal or not Boal, that's because the Malkus, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is learned from a pasuk that's not related to Motzi Shemra. It's learned from a pasuk that says Lo Selech Rochil Ba'mecha. It's the prohibition of being a talebearer. Rashi adds information that is interesting, and that you might say that how can he get lashed for mere speech? Mere speech is called a lav shein bo maisa. It's a violation of a negative command, but without action. And generally speaking, a lav shein bo maisa, the general opinion is there's no lashing for it. So how can it be over here? The answer to that is because here we're dealing with Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda is a unique opinion on that matter, that even a lav shein bo maisa does receive lashing. So Rabbi Yehuda's point about loike mikol makom, the malchus is not a is not a motzi shemra generated punishment. It's based on lo selech rocha, which was a general prohibition. That which is a motzi shemra generated punishment, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that takes place only if there was bo'al, and all of this is based on psukim. The Rabbanon, they have a different take on it. The Rabbanon's take on motzi shemra is whether bo'al or not bo'al, the punishments that appear in motzi shemra apply, and therefore the lashing that is given can be given even without bo'al, based on a local violation. The pasuk says the yisru also in the parsha of motzi shemra, and as far as the Rabbanon are concerned, that's the source of the malchus. And since motzi shemra, according to the Rabbanon, applies even shelo bo'al, both the me'asela and the malchus are administered even if he did not have intimacy with her. We continue in the Gemara. Ika di Amri Kula Reb Ozer ben Yaakov. Both opinions in the opening source, which featured a Tanakam and Reb Yehuda, are accepting of Reb Ozer ben Yaakov's opinion, namely that the parsha of motzi shemra was stated only if bo'al. V'hachi kamar motzi shemra loike v'noisei me'asela v'hu sheboal. Here the Tanakam is saying that the punishments that are administered to the lying husband are done so provided he had intimacy with her. And that's like Reb Ozer ben Yaakov that we cited earlier. The Rashi adds, and we should look at the Rashi across from here together. Hu sheboal, Reb Ozer ben Yaakov, v'kosover Tanakama libud Reb Ozer. This first opinion within Reb Ozer holds lav she'ein bo imaisa, ein loikin olav. That in general, a negative command that's violated without an action does not get malchus. Malchus the motzi shemer chidushu. The malchus that are administered in the case of motzi shemra is a chiddush, is a novel point. It's learned from v'yisroso, and since it's a chiddush, it doesn't conform to the standard halacha of lav shein boi maisa ein lokin, and therefore there will be malchus. But since it's learned from v'yisroso, that's in the parsha of motzi shemra, and the parsha of motzi shemra is stated as only if the husband had actually had intimacy with his new wife and then had cast aspersions. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Lukais Loike Mikol Makoim. Rabbi Yehuda, as we explained earlier, he says that the malchus for motzi shemra is the malchus for motzi shemra is not a motzi shemra based malchus, and therefore the malchus can be administered even if it was not bo'al. What is the basis of the malchus of motzi shemra? It's the malchus of lo selech rochia, which, as we said earlier, was a pasuk that was not limited. It's a general pasuk, and hence. And even though it's a lav shein boi maisa, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that for lav shein boi maisa in general, one is subject to malchus. The Gemara asks, "V'sover Rabbi Yehuda lukos loika mikol makom." Is that really so, that he gets malchus under all circumstances? V'atan Rabbi Yehuda omer bo'al loika lo bo'al eino loka. Here you see Rabbi Yehuda saying that if he did not have intimacy with his new wife, there won't be malchus. Just if you compare these two sources, the last two lines with some dashed underlining, the source above said loika mikol makom, and here it says eino loka, if it's a lo bo'al. So in order to answer this, we glance at the side. We have a topic heading Shnei Pirushim Lasber Divrei Rabbi Yehuda Domar Loika Mikol Makom. We're going to see two explanations of what Rabbi Yehuda meant when he said initially Loika Mikol Makom. Omar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok Loike, the expression that he used above, Loke, and you can see we have little stars to the side to connect these two lines. That Loke, when he said Loke Mikomo Koim, is Makas Mardis Midrabonan. That means on a rabbinic level, he will get Malkus even if Lo Boal. The Gemara continues at the top of Mem Vov. Rav Papa is number 2. Omar Mai Boal Loike Dekotoni Hasam. What is the expression Boal? He gets Loke, he gets Malkus. What does that mean? Momon. It means payment. The Rashi at the top, Rav Papa Amar Oile Malkus Mamish. When the sources say Malkus, they're talking about actual Malkus. Umay Boal Loike Lo Boal Eino Loke Dekomer Bahach Braisa. What is meant by in the second source, the Boal Loke versus Lo Boal Eino Loke? What does it mean over there? That is Momon Demea Sela Komar. That's a reference to the payment of the 100 sloim. The Gemara asks for Kori Le Lemomoin Malkais. If you're explaining the second source where he said Boal Loike, Lo Boal Eino Loike, and the Loke means payment of money, you're saying that if he had intimacy with his new wife, then he's subject to paying the money. So you're saying the word Loke means paying the money. And if he didn't have intimacy with his new wife, then he would not be liable to pay the money. Is it possible that the payment of money is termed Malkus? The Gemara says yes, and we have precedent for that. Tanya, as you can see in the following source. This is all part of a long answer. In the following source, we see a discussion concerning one who makes a Beis HaMikdash, a temple dedication. He dedicates money based on the erech of the individual. The erech is a Torah-based payment scale based on a person's gender and age. That's as opposed to the concept of domim, of market value. A person can dedicate someone's market value, and you evaluate how much would this person be worth if he were sold as a slave in the market. However, a person's erech is based on his gender and age, regardless of what his actual value is. That's just by way of background. And now we read the source. It says, Ha'oimer chatzi erki olai, no saying chatzi erko. If a person says, I want to give chatzi, half of my erech. So let's just say a person, a man between ages of 20 and 60, his Torah value, his Torah rate is 50 shekel. If he says chatzi erki, and the Tanna Kama says he gives half of that means he'll pay 25 shekel. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Omer loike v'noisin erech shalem. And we dashed underline the key word loke, and he has to pay the full amount. Loke amai, why is he getting malchus? What sin did this guy do that makes him deserve lashing? Omer of Papa, the word loke doesn't mean lashing. Loke be'erech shalem. It means he gets hit with the full bill. Some people in a restaurant will say, he hit me with the check. It means present him with the bill, how much he has to pay. So you can see here that the word loke is associated with payment of money. My time, why does Rabbi Yossi Berger say that a person who said chatzi erki alai, that he has to pay his full erech? Answer, Gezero chatzi erko, we are fearful that if we allow a person to pay half, when he says chatzi erko, otu erech chetzio, that he'll end up paying half if he just switches around the order of the words. But as anyone who learns Talmud knows, language and precision in language is of utmost significance. And here you have a beautiful illustration of that. There's a massive difference between saying Chatzi Erko and Erech Chetzio. The Erech Chetzio, what is the issue behind someone saying Erech Chetzio? We just got finished saying, according to Rav Papa, we're going to impose upon a person who said Chatzi Erko full payment, because he might say Erech Chetzio, and in the case of Erech Chetzio, he has to pay the full amount. Why? Because in saying Erech Chetzio, you're saying, I want to give the Erech of half of my body. Now, can a person live with half a body? No. Half a body is like saying half a heart, or saying, I want to give the Erech of my heart. Since a person cannot live without a heart, the heart is considered the entire person. This is called, in Hebrew, Aver Shanishama Tliyabo, a limb upon which his entire life is dependent. And if someone were to say, I want to give the erech of my heart, it's like saying, I want to give the erech of my entire being. And the erech of one's entire being is whatever the Torah prescribes, the full amount. So once again, according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, if we're fearful that if we allow a person to give half his amount when he says Chatzi Erko, which on its own legitimately means half of the Torah value, but if he'll give half, then he will give half if he says Erech Chetzio. But if he says Erech Chetzio, he's really saying something different. As the Gemara says, Erech Chetzio havi le'ever shanasham matlibo. Half the value of half of his body. Well, half of his body is like the equivalent of a limb that his entire life is dependent on, and in that case, he has to give his entire value, because that's in effect what he is saying. All of that really is detail, because for our purposes in this sugya, in this discussion, all we wanted to see was that the word loke or malchus is used in the context of paying money. So as we saw in this last discussion, we were interested in resolving the two statements of Rabbi Yehuda, where in the first statement of Rabbi Yehuda on the bottom of Omid Beis, Rabbi Yehuda had said that Malchus is administered under all circumstances, and the second statement of Rabbi Yehuda said it's dependent on whether he had intimacy with his new wife or not. So we saw Rav Nachman Yitzchak said that in his resolution, the expression loike mikol makom meant that he'll always be getting malchus. If he was boal, he'll get it because of the Torah expectation, and if he wasn't boal, he's going to get it because of a rabbinic consideration. The opinion of Rav Papa was quite different. Rav Papa said that as far as getting malchus, he's getting malchus whether the husband had intimacy with his new wife or didn't have intimacy. He's going to get malchus on a Torah level. As far as the second source that made a distinction regarding loke, making it dependent on baal or not, that wasn't talking about lashing. That was talking about paying the 100 selah. And if he was boal, then he'll pay the 100 selah. If he wasn't boal, he won't pay the 100 selah.